go on to residential consumption, Wellington City did change some of their figures. Wellington City has been using about 428 over the year before the current year. The latest figures aren't out, but 428 litres per person per year, per day rather. And they have decided to redefine residential consumption. They tried to make that figure look like a residential figure. Capacity, for years, have been using 230 litres per person per day as their figure. And they're using that with some justification because the metered people use that, but it's still a slightly historical figure. I think we're doing less than that, significantly less than that. But Wellington City have decided that they will define residential consumption as all consumption minus metered consumption. Now, there is significant unmetered commercial consumption. The council has unmetered consumption. The leakage is not metered. That means that the residents, their 350 litres per person per day that Wellington City quotes on their website and in their LTCCP document, they've kept that figure, includes all unmetered water and all leakage. So that they've inflated the actual figure, the best estimate of usage by residents by about another 50%. And then they try to make the residents, in my view, look bad. And that's pretty disgraceful. They did acknowledge that they had some criticism over that figure, but they're sticking to it. And I had on one of my slides the arguments that they put forward for sticking with it, and they were very difficult to read because there really isn't an argument for sticking for it. It was a very wiffly-waffly sort of statement they came up with. And even capacity, while all this was going on, had written to Wellington City, a memo to Wellington City, really trying to stop this terrible campaign of making residential consumption look bad. And they had suggested that they stick with their 230, and they had got justifications for that, but Wellington City totally ignored all of that. The IWA, which is the International Water Association, I wrote to them or emailed them and had some correspondence back. There isn't an international definition of residential water consumption, but they thought Australia's was okay. Australia's residential consumption is water that goes through the gate. And there's another, that's there, I think in Belgium they use the same sort of basis. That's what we'd all take, you know, to redefine the word residential is pretty unreasonable. I don't think it would stack up in a court of law. Words have their normal meaning. Residential means within the residence. It doesn't mean the leakage or used by a fire engine, that sort of thing. But that's what Wellington City is saying is residential water. They have totally redefined it. And then GW have also been quite a party to this campaign. You know, it's a sort of, to my mind, it's a Franwell Kerry Pendergast beat up. And they have come up with the idea of 10% to 15% savings by water meters. And when you look at that figure, I found it also in this book, a little green book on water. And so I wrote to the authors of this book and said, where did you get that figure? And the guy said, well, it was some time ago, but he gave me a link back to where he had it. And it actually is back to 88 to 92, a survey done in the UK of water usage. Of course, New Zealand is not the UK, that's one point. The other point is that, and I had a couple of slides showing the trend in water usage right back historically from about the 70s and 80s through for Wellington and for Auckland. And over the 90s you see a significant drop in water consumption. And that was a trend, was in fact an international trend. Auckland were putting in meters at the time of that drop, Wellington wasn't, but the drop was very similar. So there were things, societal changes taking place at that time when that sort of figure of the 10 to 15% savings by introducing water meters came out, and that's the origin. That you'll see it again, because it'll be recycled and recycled and recycled. If Wellington, if the 10 to 15%, the way they quote it is 10 to 15% overall. That means residents that use only 50% of the water are going to have to save 30%, 20 to 30% to meet the 10 to 15% savings that they quote with meters, and that is just not at all possible. When you look at the actual differences between summer and winter use in Wellington, one of my figures later on in my talk was in my slides, shows about 3.5% saving maximum if we use no more water in spring, autumn and summer than we do in winter. If we use water at the rate that we use it in winter for the whole year, and there's not much gardening in winter, or not much water for gardening in winter, and that's what they blame it all on, gardening, then we would save 3.5%. And those figures are indisputable. That's, but they don't seem to, when I said that to Greater Wellington, Fan Wild said food for thought, but it was just a throwaway comment, and nothing of course happened in their LTCCP. Yeah, there's probably a few other things that I've got there, but you see, anti-gardening one, I had a few quotes on this anti-gardening campaign. It really is a myth. There was a figures done by Brands Building Research, who have put out this publication as well, one of their Level Sustainable series, which has got a few errors in it, unfortunately. But they did a series, a detailed water use series in Pauparam, who'd been in the news for excessive water usage, and in Auckland. And the interesting thing is that the figures are very, very similar. I think the averages were about 178 litres per person per day for Auckland and 186 litres per person per day for Pauparam. They weren't large samples, but they had very detailed use of where people use water. They could manage to find out whether they're using the toilet or the laundry in the kitchen and just turning taps on. There's a lot of use of water is just turning a tap on to rinse something out and so on. And the gardening use wasn't all that significant. There were one or two instances where taps had been left on all the time, or there'd been a leak. But the overall figures, taking all that into account, Auckland to Kapiti, an average difference from 178 to 186. Now Wellington won't be, if we're going to blame gardening, Wellington won't be as bad, if you like, if you call it bad, which I don't, as Pauparam. So it's very interesting that when the figures are there, they don't want to look at them. And Brands, unfortunately, had a couple of very confusing statements in the summary of their report. They had their prejudices, in my view, and the facts. And in the end, in their facts, they said that there's no significant difference. But they also had other statements. They said that if you pay for water, you'll value it more. Well, that's another thing that you will see bandied about, that if we pay for the water, we'll use less.